always happy to chime in. Thank you very much, Louisa. That was a very good introduction and a large and wonderful array of images. You know what? One thing that struck me as I was looking at the images you have shown, and in conversations I've had over the years, is in a way the broad definition of what public space is, what open space is, what the public realm is, and the fact that the taxonomy is extremely large from, for everything that goes from the region to the room. If we take the room being whatever it may be, with its adjacent space, if it's residential, a balcony, or if it's an institution, the courtyard, whatever it is, I don't know that we have an available image of that taxonomy, but the big division in my mind has always been in conversations between what we call green space and what the public realm is. And I think you intrinsically focused on those areas of the city, the byways and the intersections that look like the streets and the squares. In the United States, I think we privilege green spaces as open space. When somebody says an open space, they think of a Central Park or a Bryant Park. They don't necessarily think of the spaces in New York that are missing. We do not have a Zocalo, as in Mexico City. We don't have a Tiananmen Square. We don't have the Piazza del Popolo. We don't have a lot of large paved open spaces. In part, in New York at the founding, we had very little open space because everything was laid out in the capitalist system to produce a tax rateable. So public space was considered to be a loss. You couldn't get taxes from it. You couldn't get income from the city. And in fact, it was a small group of people who lobbied that there be some public spaces. For those who know, New York Broadway slices through the city, and it leaves a number of little funny triangles that nobody thought were worth developing anyway. So, we'll make those little parks. That'll be Madison Square Park and Union Square and so on. But until the Central Park came around, and for myself, a Manhattan resident, I live in a district with no public space except the streets, and I don't discount the streets. But we don't eventually find, as in Savannah, a square, or all over Paris and London, small green spaces that serve a local community. So this idea of this taxonomy and between the green and what I call the hard space that I consider to be the agile space. And I don't want to speak for Miguel, but since Barcelona, to me, has always represented a benchmark in the Olympic construction era, where any number of spaces were both reformed or created, where buildings were removed from Barceloneta or the Barrio Chino to make every neighborhood have a little open space, and some of them both planned and designed for multiple activities, meaning they could be empty at one point, but they were equipped with power and light and water, and you could use them for multiple activities. Again, in a contrast to the States, we tend to overprogram, we do it right away, and then in the end, you find you cannot use it in other ways. So, anecdotally, I was invited to a small town north of Cluj, Napoca, in Romania. They were replanning their central space. It was a heavily planted space. In the olden days, if you'd seen an etching, it was an open market square. In the communist era, to prevent the gathering of large groups of people for protest, they made it a heavily planted area, no place for public gathering. In the current era, it is being reformed. I must say, I don't know if it's a direct relationship to the work of Jan Gehl and others, but from building to building, not from sidewalk to street to street to sidewalk to green, but the whole place being reformed with an idea that it can have multiple uses, that the car will now no longer be dominant, that while they'll be green because we value it, it won't be only green. And I was struck by the fact that the design of it was really being driven by the current state of political awareness. communist versus democratic. It was communist space or democratic space. So it seems to me, as you have shown, that we need to approach the nature of space, be it now for the pandemic or the long term, with greater agility, with an understanding that it may not be a constant, that we may need in our multifaceted society the ability to use any space for more than one purpose, while at the same time balancing basic needs. And we have now the greatest opportunity. It's kind of, for want of a better word, open season on rethinking how we're going to use what I think is the most valuable space we have, which is the space that we share. I'm going to close with one little comment. We can revisit it. But for those who are familiar with the city of Zurich, Zurich has out of the mayoral office a director of public space. The director of public space is the most powerful person in that government, because nothing can happen in the public realm without the director of public space reviewing the implications, be it by a utility or a vested group, that it comes under that umbrella with the most sophisticated analysis and management for how that space will be always the best it can be. So that's Luisa, some years ago, I went to that wonderful conference in Barcelona, the Smart Cities Conference. I sat on a panel with a woman who was a very highly ranked woman in the Pakistani government, dealing with social issues. And she said her goal in the next 5 years was to make sure that internet connectivity reached into the furthest reaches of the agrarian regions of Pakistan. That was her goal in life. It was not an unknown circumstance. And as Hendrik said, the internet is now coming close to being discussed as a human right, as housing and water. Defining something as a human right does not mean everybody gets it. It means that the goal is that we know that not everyone has clean water in the free towns in South Africa, or even appropriate waste and sanitary conditions, or appropriate, but the goal stated by the UN or wherever, that what are human rights, air, water, housing, the internet access has been added to that. And the philanthropic communities, certainly in the States and elsewhere, have donated hundreds of thousands of laptop computers into rural areas where they know that otherwise they are cut off. So I think there is a new understanding emerging about this. I don't think, of course, it's been provided, nor will it ever be 100%. But I think one should take some comfort in the fact that it's recognized, and that this pandemic is increasing that recognition, and that our role is to take advantage of the portal that is opening to make this more available. That's what we've got. There's a big opportunity here. And the opportunity is not only to recognize what is missing, but to recognize how we can provide.